Welcome to our Devos, where we are continuing in our subject of studying the Spirit of the living God. I hope it's been helpful for you to understand some of the things that He does, and we could spend lifetimes really trying to understand who God is. But one of the things that the Holy Spirit does that was a remarkable shift in the way that people viewed God in terms of Old Testament and New Testament history is this. The Holy Spirit provides immediate access to the presence of God. Now, why is this a big deal? It's not as big of a deal to you maybe, but it might be. I grew up thinking that in order to connect to God really meaningfully, you had to be in the church. Like you had to be in a church. So there was something, when I was a kid, the handful of times that I did go into a church, there was something like, I'm going to, into the presence of God. I have to get into the church. The church is the way that I access God's presence. And I realized after learning, years later, after I became a Christian, that, believe it or not, this was kind of the way it was set up in the Old Testament. Because God dwelled in the temple. The presence of God dwelled in the temple. And, there'd be that special place beyond the Holy of Holies where the presence of God would be, and, the Ark of the Covenant and all that stuff you could read in the Mosaic literature and the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Really, really fascinating stuff about how God's presence was manifested there. Then we see the shift happening when we talk about the temple, and Solomon constructs the temple, which is going to be the place that would be, God's place, and people would worship at the temple, and it became a big thing to worship at the temple. And we see in one of the books of the Old Testament, and as you go through Old Testament history, we see that the glory of God, the presence of God departing from the temple. But that didn't stop the temple from being a place where people would go as a way to connect with God and His presence. Now, I have a point to all this, and we're getting there quicker. And here's the point. The Holy Spirit, through the ministry of Christ, enables us to have instant and immediate access to the presence of God. It's a really big deal. And Jesus intimates this and implies this as He speaks to the woman at the well. If you remember the story, the Samaritans did not have access to the temple the way the Jews did. There was a major division about how the Samaritans were viewed in that time in history by the Jews. And the Samaritans, that word was a racial slur to the Jewish people at the time. So Jesus meets this Samaritan woman, and the question she asks him when she has the opportunity and when she realizes there's something different about this guy, that he's a prophet or something, she asks him about how to worship God and where could they go. Worshiping God at the temple, which is the right way. This is Jesus' response, the context of it. He says, "The hour is coming and is now here when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship Him. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship Him in spirit and in truth." Well, what's He implying? He doesn't say, well, you have to go to this temple. He doesn't say you have to worship at the Samaritan area. No. He's saying true worshipers are going to connect to the presence of God. How? Through the Spirit. The Holy Spirit provides us immediate access to God. You don't have to come to the church in order to connect with God. You don't have to go somewhere holy and sacred in order to connect to God. Everywhere you are as a Christian has an opportunity to become a sacred space, a holy space, because God walks with you. True worshipers have the presence of God within them. Therefore, God has the ability to make His presence known in any circumstance. So just remember, as you sit here listening to this, you are in a holy place because the Holy One, the Holy Spirit, the presence of the living God, the Spirit of the living God dwells within you.